Thank you very much, Mr. Scholz. Now we move on to the debate. Let me remind all the members, we have 2 minutes for the questions and 3 for the answers, and we start with Mr. Markus Ferber from EPP.
Ja, vielen Dank, Frau Vorsitzende.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Minister, for your introductory comments. As the EPP group, we look forward to working very closely with you. And hopefully we'll be able to meet if the Robert Koch Institute, the German Institute of Public Health, allows it. Now, I have a couple of questions for you. At the end of your introduction, you mentioned money laundering. You said that one of your priorities was going to be the fight against money laundering and the financing of terrorism. Now, we have a German financial intelligence unit, and there we've seen how money laundering, the fight against money laundering shouldn't be organized. I mean, basically, it seems that some of the people who work there are under investigation for various things. So that's not great. And given that situation in Germany, how do you see the fight against money laundering being organized in Europe? A second question, if I may. You said that you welcome the fact that the European Union is now taking on debt. The Chancellor said that this is a unique situation. It's just happening once. You yourself said that the funding of the Recovery Fund is genuine progress, and you see no way back. And can you say a little bit more about that? Do you see this moving towards a debt union, or what did you mean? Thank you very much.
Bin ich jetzt dran, ja, ne?
Should I answer? Okay, thank you. So, on money laundering, I think we need to make a great deal of progress here during recent years. Germany has made progress. My predecessor took a decision that the Financial Intelligence Unit would be moved from the police authority to the customs authority with very few employees. They haven't got a great deal of possibility to do what they do with the resources they've got. We need more staff, and obviously you need to be successful. There's also technical and technological development required, and we need to be able to receive reports and look at them technically. Technical skills shouldn't be left to those who carry out money laundering, and they shouldn't be left in the private sector. The public sector must also be able to work with artificial intelligence and have the appropriate tools that it needs if it's going to work appropriately. All these things are being looked at, and there are various legislative acts that are going to increase the remit of this agency. But as far as I see it, this process hasn't yet been concluded. Authorities need to have access to data as well. This leads to various discussions, but this is crucial. Everyone needs to have access to data so that we can make progress in as good a manner as possible. But I think given things in the world today, I think we can only make progress if we work together in Europe. And I think it would be very important to have proposals on a European supervisory authority so that we can fight money laundering at the European level effectively. Now, on the question that relates to European recovery, well, I think very important decisions were taken, which I supported. There was the package from the finance ministers of Europe at the start of the crisis, 540 billion euros, I think it was almost. And also there was the possibility to receive credit from the EIB and provide that to support SMEs right across Europe. Some countries do that themselves because of their development bank structures, but some don't. And so the measures we've taken have ensured a level playing field. And in order to do that, we need the EIB. We've got the SURE programme, which was set up by the EU to ensure that people who are unemployed right across Europe could receive support, and also there are special credit lines under the ESM. Now, the second decision relates to the recovery programme, and here we're talking about the agreement in Council, and I worked very hard to ensure that that agreement could take place so that we could end up where we did end up. There's going to be the joint raising of funds to support the activities of member states, those which are particularly affected by the COVID crisis. Now, the decision was taken that this funding shouldn't go directly into member states' budgets. It should relate to rebuilding and the recovery. I think that was, again, a big step forward. And in general, I believe that we need to spend this money now while we're in the crisis, so we can go over the crisis. The money shouldn't be spent afterwards. Obviously, if we borrow money, we have to pay it back. And this is already envisaged in the MFF. But this raises the question, how are we going to pay the money back? And the clear response is that, well, we've taken this step to borrow money in order to deal with the crisis, and we need to pay it back via own resources. And this is something that we're discussing, and I think it's a good thing. It'll strengthen Europe.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to Mr. Jonas Fernandez from S&D.
Thank you. Thank you, chairs. Welcome, Minister Scholz. I am sure that we will collaborate in the next few months to close many dossiers that we have opened yet. In any case, I would like to ask you today two questions. First, in the last July, we welcomed the European Council agreement on MFF and Next Generation EU. However, the European Council also agreed on governance for the Recovery and Resilience Facility that this Parliament cannot share. In this sense, this Parliament will have for sure another position, and I would like to ask you about your room for maneuver to negotiate with this Parliament another governance for this instrument, because now, as you know, we cannot share that most of the responsibility of this instrument will have in the Council hands without any opinion of this Parliament. And for sure, this Parliament will have another opinion, and we will have to negotiate in trialogues before the end of this year. And I would like to know how will you manage this situation, and if you are ready to convince your colleagues in the Council to review this agreement. And my second question is on the solvency support instrument. As you know, the European Council decided to delete this initiative. In this Parliament, we are working on this proposal, and I don't know if you see any possibility to keep this proposal alive, because at the end of the day, it's one of the most relevant initiatives to guarantee the level playing field inside the single market. Thank you very much.
Please go ahead, Mr. Scholz.
Schönen Dank.
Thank you very much. On your question about the MFF, Multi-Annual Finance Framework, and also the issue of Recovery and Resilience Facility, all these measures that are formulated for Next Generation EU. As far as I see things, we do need to discuss this further. Everyone knows that we are being very cautious. There's a lot depending on it. A lot of work has been done, and I think that there's also been cooperation between, or a conjunction between, the MFF and Next Generation EU. Not everything is separate, and of course that means it's very important for us not to forget the connections when we speak about the individual points. Now, it was very complicated to get any agreement on the question of how concretely to develop these programs. Everybody knows this. All of those who participated wanted their own rights to be maintained. It's not going to be easy in the future either. It's going to take some time. But the aim is that we're all trying to find a solution before the end of the year so that all the loose ends can be tied up by the beginning of next year. And at the beginning of next year, we'll be able to get the funds moving. A lot of countries are waiting for this. And we think that that's good news, which we will be able to share with the global economy in Europe. And the second question. Unfortunately, I'm not really quite clear what you meant. Perhaps you could repeat that part of your question.
Maybe, Jonas, you can repeat the question?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. No, the questions are the same. First, the governance on the Recovery and Resilience Facility. I think that the Parliament will have another position and we will have to negotiate. Secondly, the second question is on the solvency support instrument.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Solvency support instrument. That was the point I missed. I think it's a component of the overarching negotiation, and I think that in terms of the framework in which it can be developed, I believe that the ideas linked to this should not be abandoned. And you're asking whether it's correct? Well, yes, absolutely, and I think it should be continued and pursued.
Chair, do you wish to proceed?
Hello?
Please go ahead, Chair.
I'm sorry, I had lost the connection for a minute. I apologize for that. Now I give the floor to Luis Garicano from Renew.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair, and thanks very much, Second Coordinator of Renew Europe, Mr. Scholz. I want to thank you sincerely for the crucial work that you, along with Mr. Cookies and Mr. Weizsäcker and your entire department have done to put together an ambitious recovery plan that allows us to come out of this crisis stronger. I think it's been a phenomenal success, together with the Chancellor, of course. I have two questions. First, on the calendar of own resources. You did say that you agree with the need for own resources, but this Parliament is very concerned about the Council's commitment to introduce new own resources. The language that you agreed is not really a strong commitment, and we risk dragging our feet and again not getting this reform. Your country's main priority, the financial transaction tax, faces tough opposition. You didn't mention the CCTB in this European Council language. Your government's among the few that doesn't like the emission trading scheme as an own resource, which, to be honest, is one of the ones that we from Renew Europe find most reasonable. Keeping all of this in, how credible is the own resource calendar, and how are you going to try to make sure that this calendar becomes a reality? And second, I would like to hear your opinion about the future of the Union's fiscal rules. I know that you are a big believer in financial stability. We all want financial stability, but the truth of the matter is rules are suspended, and it will be hard to go back to the same Maastricht rules. Clearly, the Stability and Growth Pact, with its emphasis in certain deficits and debt figures, is likely to be a bad guide for future policy. Do you agree with the European Fiscal Board's recommendation to reform the Stability and Growth Pact, considering it excessively complex and unintelligible? And what are your views on how should that reform proceed? Thank you very much.
Schönen Dank.
Thank you very much. With regards to own resources, that's a key part of the decision that was taken by Council. Now, I'm cautious about going too far, but let me just explain. We have made the decision with this specific situation, this specific crisis for 2021, 2022, 2023 to use more financial resources to try and stabilize the member states, to have a collective recovery to support that. I think that's important. We're looking at future-based issues such as the digital transformation, the environmental transition that we have. At the same time, it's clear that these debts, this money that's been borrowed, will have to be paid back at some point, and certain criteria have been set out for that. And part of that is the own resources decision. We can't leave this situation, obviously, without any kind of response. Now, when we look at the possibility of reforms here, what we want is a strong capacity to act. Citizens want us to take decisions. If Parliament is pushing forward and trying to achieve this, I think this is going to really help pull us forward over the next few months and years, and we certainly need to take those discussions instead of just postponing them. On the emissions trading scheme and broadening that to air and maritime transport, for example, I think the question marks here are not necessarily from the member states. I think there is generally support there. I think we probably can find a solution here. We just need to work out some of the technical details, perhaps look at some alternative slight amendments that will achieve the same result. We have the plastic tax, which isn't really a tax, even though that's what we're calling them. This is looking at plastic use in the member states, plastic that can't then be recycled further. So this data we should have hopefully soon from member states, together with the possibility of a digital transaction tax or a financial transaction tax. These are separate debates, as I've already mentioned. I think we will be able to find a solution when it comes to the digital transaction tax. It's something we need to find a solution to. I know a number of countries have made commitments to pushing this forward. There has been some that have reacted very badly to this, but it is important we get some kind of global consensus, and I hope we can do that in the autumn, at least a blueprint on this particular issue. That's going to be important for the OECD and for us. Now, on financial transaction tax, on moving that forward, I think it does make sense. There are countries that have this already or have made a decision to push this forward. We in Germany have looked, for example, at the different systems, looking at the financial tax that exists in France, for example. What we need to do is to come to some agreement with these different systems, how this would work in terms of an own resource, but I think this is something that could have positive effects for solidarity in Europe. You would have some countries that might contribute more or less, but it would be a mutual benefit, and I think that would be positive. It would encourage countries that might not be so eager to participate, but would do this on the basis of solidarity. So I think there is some optimism when it comes to reform. We are, of course, in a difficult situation, which is why the current fiscal rules have been suspended. We need to look at how this is going to be dealt with beyond the end of this year, and that's what we have as a current issue to deal with. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to Gunnar Beck from ID.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Guten Tag, Herr Minister.
Thank you, Minister, now you talked about the EU Recovery Fund and you said that that was a big step forward for the EU and also Germany. Some colleagues have already mentioned that. And you said confidently that the EU's joint debts will be dealt with. Now, German salaries are above the EU average, but German employees pay the highest employment taxes, and this, according to the ECB, have the lowest level of assets in the entire EU and the lowest level of property assets across the EU. Rents in Germany are half as high as they are in Austria, Portugal and Italy, and final salaries are lower than the EU average. Germany has a wealthy state with many poor citizens. The resources from the Corona Fund essentially flow east and south, whereas Germany is paying just under half, 44% of the resources to the fund. Can you explain to the voters at home how poor Germans are subsidizing wealthy southern and eastern Europeans? Thank you.
Schönen Dank für Ihre als Frau.
Well, thank you for your view that you put as a question. I think I can give a relatively brief answer to that. I think that there are certain realities that are reflected in countries' economies, and Germany has a strong economy and is a high-income country. And this is something that is valid for our citizens as well. You can find all kinds of examples, you can calculate whatever you want, but it doesn't change the fact that citizens' well-being in Germany is very high, particularly when compared to many other EU member states. When your economy is in a good situation, you can use all kinds of mathematical tricks to prove that you're the poorest, but actually that really results in unacceptable conclusions. I mean, everyone knows that that's not true. We have just seen that the German health system is an excellent one. It has a very high capacity in intensive care beds, and this has also helped us to be in a good position when it comes to the pandemic, and it has meant that our economy has been able to remain strong. So I don't share your views. They're wrong.
Thank you very much. Now we move on to the next speaker, Sven Giegold from the Greens.
Herr Minister, zunächst.
Minister, welcome. Very nice to see you here in the committee. I just wanted to say that we're thankful to the Finance Ministry for its role and its responsibility in putting together this draft budget and the plans for the Recovery Fund. A lot of work has been done to get a majority in this Parliament, moving us towards a more unified European position. And it's some extremely important points to the Parliament are still being discussed. They haven't yet been resolved, but nevertheless, we are seeing, as in this corona crisis, how important and essential European cooperation is. A lot of people in our society have suffered and some have profited. Some digital groups, Amazon, for instance, local shops were closed and Amazon has drawn a lot of profit from this. And they haven't been properly taxed. Parliament is in favour of a country based publication of accounts for these major companies. And 2 years ago in the committee, you said that you were against such tax transparency. But now you are, in the meantime, in favour of this. When will the Council put this on the agenda again? Germany meant that we lost the vote under the Finnish presidency on this. So for these large companies, the European Parliament wants transparency. And when will the German presidency deal with this? And then what about digital tax? When will the European digital tax be brought forward? There are 10 million euros that for these big companies that aren't being brought in as a result of the delays. And this Parliament has taken a positive decision, and we are waiting for the Council under the German presidency to decide on all of these matters. Thank you. Thank you, and thanks for your kind words regarding the great progress that we are making in Europe at the moment with these two major responsibilities that we have in the Council and in the Parliament. We're talking about the MFF and, of course, the future of Europe's recovery fund. And I think that the country-by-country reporting that you mentioned, there are decisions required. And you know that 2 years ago, I didn't actually say what you said I said, but I said that the situation was difficult. The German government doesn't have a unified position on this at the moment. I've said that as far as I am concerned, it is an instrument that we could promote, and I think will depend on voting in different European countries how we can implement this. I'm convinced that it's important to get clarity on this, and I think more and more people are convinced of this too, and I think that's good. Now, taxing the employment taxes and the digital taxes, I think we'll have a blueprint. I hope we'll have a blueprint in the autumn with the OECD, and we'll be able to organise a global agreement. The taxing of the digital economy and the reorganisation of this is being discussed in Europe, and this is going to have consequences for the fiscal systems of companies throughout the world, and it's not going to make life any easier for us, but we do still need a solution. And I do want to emphasise here that the aspects you've raised, we perhaps have slightly different priorities, but it is nevertheless going to be important for us to reach a decision this year, and I'm going to do everything in my power to enable this.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to, Dirk Epping from ECR.
Ja, danke, Frau Vorsitzende. Herr Bundesfinanzminister.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you to the Finance Minister. I would like to know, with regards to the time frame for the recovery fund, we're talking about 750 billion here. Do you think you can get this concluded by the end of the year? There are, of course, problems. As you know, you need, of course, the consent of the European Parliament. What we're talking about here is the issue of rule of law. This is a prickly issue. There's also the ratification process as well when it comes to own resources. So this is a significant obstacle to overcome. You're talking about 50 parliaments that have to go through this ratification process. So I wonder how that is to be achieved. Then a question with regards to the Commission. With regards to capital markets, should they wade into this before the ratification process is concluded? Thank you very much for your response. Thank you very much for your question. I think I can respond to both of these together, as the second, I think, emphasises the first. We need to make all the efforts we can to wrap this up as quickly as possible. I hope very much we can get it done this year. There are, of course, significant challenges when it comes to trying to accelerate a process that would normally take 2, 3 or 4 years, possibly. So it is a challenge to get everything done in 1 year. As you said, there are a number of different parliaments this has to go through to sign off on, of course.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to Martin Schurdevan from the GUE.
Vielen Dank, Frau Vorsitzende. Herr Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I hope you can hear me. Thank you very much for this important exchange that we're holding. Well, I'm very pleased to see how optimistic you are, but there is one key issue that I think was mentioned too vaguely, and I'd like to bring it up again. Now, during the corona crisis, as we're aware, state debt is going to increase massively. The ECB says that in the Eurozone, state debt is going to go over 100% of GDP on average, Greece 200%, Italy 140%, France 120%, etc. Now, Germany is closer to the criteria, the Maastricht criteria, but Germany decided on no longer having the debt brake in place to fight the COVID pandemic. So what do you see as important for stability and for growth as the German government? Because we're a long way from the Maastricht criteria in the Eurozone. It seems that Germany is going a different way from almost everyone else. And then a second question, if I may. I'd like a little bit more information on the digital tax, because we also the financial transactions tax. I mean, we have this pooled debt, and if we're going to pay that back using own resources, well, that means that we're having a joint taxation policy at the European level, but that doesn't actually exist at the moment. So is the castle built on sand? Essentially, I think at the moment, these debts are going to be paid back by member state contributions. So when is this digital tax going to come in? When is all of this going to happen? When are we actually going to have a European digital tax? And then a further question on that. When do you think the introduction of a financial transaction tax is going to happen? Is that going to be possible at all? Thank you.
Zunächst mal.
Well, let me begin by saying something on state debt. The scenario that you described is one of the reasons why I have spoken in favour of finding a solution which means a joint recovery fund and which contains grants. And I did that in debates in Europe and in Germany, because if you look at the economic developments in member states, which is what we've all done, well, the first package of 540 billion, which I described, and was important to ensure that no member state had difficulties to fund itself during the crisis, and also didn't have any problems refinancing its debt on the capital markets. And I think that really was a good way of ensuring that Europe could be credible and could function. And obviously, for that to take place, we have to stick together. But these grants were just part of the response. This didn't relate to the general budget, but tangible reform and recovery projects. But I do think that with the situation will look different given what we've done than it would have done if we hadn't. Now, on the question on the Stability and Growth Pact, I don't think we should be looking into the distant future here. Stability is obviously a key criterion for the future, not only for Germany, but for Europe as a whole. But I think what's important is for us to do the right thing now so that things can go well in the future. I mean, it's clear that if we want to stimulate growth now, we don't want to undermine it. And this is something we're trying to do with all the decisions we've taken. Now, on the various own resources that you mentioned, the digital tax and the FTT. Well, I think that when it comes to the digital tax, we have to do everything possible to produce an international level agreement. I made a great deal of effort on that, and I hope we will be able to get some kind of a breakthrough this autumn. Germany and me personally have worked very hard on this. And I think that it's important now to try and achieve this agreement. The United States are involved in the discussions now, and the United States also know that it's in no one's interest, given the current problems we have right across the globe in the health sector, financial sector, all the concerns that there are when it comes to economic growth, trade, conflicts, etc. It's in no one's interest for there to be another conflict somewhere else. In addition, this kind of a tax would help us fund all our other activities. So I think that the pressure is going to help us come to an agreement here. Now, for a long time, we've thought that we should have an FTT. But, I mean, it's a bit bizarre that we tax everything in Europe. The only thing that we don't tax is financial transactions. The two major stock exchanges in Europe, London and Paris, have a financial transaction tax in place, and we haven't seen any business leave those exchanges as a result. So I think we need to bring this in. And then the new scenario is that we need own resources in order to refinance the recovery package, and I think that makes it more likely that we will be able to achieve something here at the European level. Now, the problems that you've described exist. Without own resources, it's going to be tough. But perhaps the problem is part of the solution. There's no one that's going to stop a decision coming on own resources because they're so important in order for us to proceed appropriately in the future. So the pressure that we're under perhaps is helpful for the situation that we find ourselves in.
Very much. Now I give the floor to Lydia Pereira from EPP.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Scholz, 2020 is the year of the pandemic crisis. Our focus must be on the economic recovery to turn recession into growth and create more and better jobs. The difficult economic framework caused by the COVID-19 outbreak is a challenge, but also an opportunity to find new innovative solutions and to accelerate some changes that we are discussing for years without concrete steps forward. On the budgetary policies, I welcome the German Presidency intention to a Stability and Growth Pact review. This crisis proved that flexibility is a pillar of resilience, and I hope you agree that national budgets have to count on some room for maneuver in the next years. With that being said, I want to focus my question on the recovery plan as designed by the European Council. First, I would like to know how you see the balance between grants and loans after the Council decision on the major reduction of the dimension of the grants. In any case, the decision on the common issuing of debt is a major step forward that needs a solid ground. That ground is the own resources decision reform. The Council decision is a step forward, but it is still vague and postpones concrete decisions on new resources, as we already mentioned by some colleagues today. Yesterday, the Committee on Budgets of this Parliament asked for more commitment and proposed a concrete calendar for the introduction of new own resources. My question is about the German presidency position on the level of ambition that we can introduce to the own resources reform. Do you believe that the next 4 months are a window of opportunity to a proper reform? And what basis do you see for that? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that what you're asking is own resources. I would like to try and explain what I mean. I think it is, qualitatively speaking, a change to the European Union, more own resources. And we've already done this in the Council's decisions on and its concrete proposals on the recovery package. The practical distribution, 390 billion grants and the rest in loans. All of this, I think, is a good solution. And then we have the question, how can we accomplish this? How can we ensure that the own resources decision happens? If we hadn't had it, it would have been serious consequences. It's probably, the window for reform is as wide open as wider open than it's ever been. We need to take decisions about our own budget, about recovery, about flows of funds. All of this is linked to own resources, but a lot of this is already there. The informal meeting with the financial ministers in Berlin next week will discuss this question. It's on the agenda. We'll be discussing it, and I'll ask the question because it is my goal to create a general awareness that we can't just keep going with the same agenda we've had in recent years. We need to put a bit of pressure on. There is going to be a decision next March, I think, and I think we need to understand, everyone needs to understand, we can't avoid this any longer. We need this decision. My request is that we concentrate on what is in the Council proposal. We want to ensure that it reflects the quality of the European project. It shouldn't just be about where you personally come from. As far as the EU as a whole is concerned and the whole European area, all of that should be clear. And I think that is essential. And this will increase the legitimacy of what we're doing, and that will enable us to make progress. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to Joachim Schuster from SD.
Ja, vielen Dank, Herr Minister, dass
Thank you very much, Minister, for being here to have this discussion with us. I would like to thank you personally for the contribution you made in helping the Council to come to its conclusion in July on the European recovery plan. There were certain birthing pains there, I think, but I think you're right. This is a historic step forward. This is a very important moment for progress in European fiscal integration. I would also like to touch on two specific points. A lot's been said already. I think the issue of fiscal integration is not just about creating common resources and how we use those resources and stable fiscal policy. I think it's also important to look at financial and economic coordination and how we can make progress in that area as well. I think there's still some controversy. We were working on making reforms in public investment, for example, before the corona crisis. And I think there's a discussion about the lack of investment. Also, when it comes to climate, when it comes to the digital transition, that there really needs to be a lot more public investment in these areas. So I think we need to really look at this type of investment that has a huge added value and how that can feed into a stable financial policy. So what do you want to try and achieve along these lines in the Council Presidency? How do you think you can balance these different requirements for these financial and economic indicators? And then the second point I wanted to raise is with regards to the recovery programme. Now, the possibility for Parliament to have input here is really quite limited. So when it comes to co-decision, it is limited. And do you think there's any possibility to strengthen that, perhaps an interinstitutional agreement, for example? What's your opinion here? Thank you very much.
Ja, schönen Dank.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the question and for the kind words as well. I think it's very clear when we look at the specific situation that we find ourselves in when it comes to coordinating policy. I think we do need to do more in this area, and that's part of the discussions that are ongoing. We have an informal ECOFIN coming up, and we are going to be discussing the current economic situation amongst the ministers and what can be done in this area. With regards to European policy, the major issues on the agenda are the ones we have already listed here. I don't want to go into those again, but it is important we balance those different aspects. We want to generate more growth in Europe, of course. So we need to look at the capital markets, we need to look at the banking union, the ESM reform. That's almost come to a conclusion. We just need to take the last steps there with regards to the process. I don't think there's much appetite to start something completely new at this current time. So I think we've set out the issues we have before us. Perhaps just one additional comment. The minimum effective tax, this is a European issue. I think it's important to have a coordinated approach here. We have an issue here when it comes to this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to Engin Eroglu from Renew.
Ja, sehr geehrter Herr Minister.
Yes, well, Minister Scholz, once again, thank you very much for your words. And let me once again say that it's the right thing to do when you talk about a breakthrough in a digital tax at the international level, and I cross my fingers that that should be the case. But when it comes to the European Union, we have an official inflation rate of 0.2%. But and that means that the people who have built up assets over recent years and decades are worried about so-called helicopter money, because they may well end up seeing their wealth eroded by, for example, negative interest rates. And the losers there are the people who have worked hard for themselves and also to leave something to their children. And then, on the other hand, we've got the fact that the public sector has got used to these low interest rates. And my question to you, Mr. Scholz, is do you see it possible for us to return to normal interest rates, and would we be able to survive in that situation and prosper? Thank you very much for the question. Well, I think this actually deserves a more in-depth discussion, because there are many controversial economic issues that relate to that. I don't think we can say that there is one single cause at the moment for the negative and low interest rates we have at the moment. I mean, there have been many developments that have been pushing interest rates down now for a long time, not only in Germany and Europe, but right across the world. And projections and forecasts suggest that that will last for a long time now, quite apart from, for example, regardless of what, for example, central bank policy is. Now, many people are looking for returns, but there often aren't enough investments available for them. I mean, there's a very simple problem. I mean, if we were able to build 400,000 homes in Germany a year, well, that would be worthwhile, but investors don't really want to invest in that kind of thing. They invest their billions elsewhere. And that means that the yield for the money that's invested in building homes, for example, is lower. There are many issues that play a role here. It's a major economic debate. It's not just the result of the current situation and doesn't only relate to central bank policy. I think it's a global trend that's affecting our economies and economies right across the world, and we can only respond with appropriate levels of investment. I think we need progress in the banking and capital markets. That's something we shouldn't underestimate. And I think if we can make progress there, it would mean greater investments would be possible in Europe. I mean, if we compare Europe to the United States, here investments are funded 20% equity, 80% from loans. In the United States, it's the other way around. So I think if we can complete the banking and finance union, then we may well be able to have consequences on many things, including the interest rate.
Thank you very much.